The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Greenfield Savings Bank, providing residential lending advice. Greenfield Savings Bank, member FDIC, DIF, equal housing lender, NMLS 409187.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Unless you're driving, close your eyes and take a deep breath in, out.
You have reached the Fabulous 413 Election Day Oasis. We are not going to talk about swing states, exit polls, or predictions of the outcomes of today's vote.
We are going to encourage you to go vote if you haven't already.
Yeah, do that.
Later in the show, we'll vote on things like donuts, macaroni and cheese, and French fries when we talk with John Hodgman and Jesse Thorn, who are bringing the Judge John Hodgman podcast live to the Shea Theater in Turners Falls this Friday.
And while today is an historic election for sure, we are going to focus not so much on the present or future outcome of today's election, but rather look to the past.
It is time for another installment of The Power of History with Professor of History at Clark University,
Yes.
Dr. Ousmane Power Greene. And while I would love to talk exclusively about your history of hip-hop class that is wildly popular...
Honestly, that's just going to have to be something we bring up for another month.
Whenever
Exactly.
other than now, because while every U.S. election is in some way historic, this one is, in many people's minds, very historic for lots of different reasons. But we're going to look back to learn from history about another important figure who ran for president who would be celebrating their 100th birthday this year.
Incredible timing, I think. But yeah, no, I'm excited to talk about Shirley Chisholm. For those that are not aware of her, one of the more significant African Americans of the 20th century, certainly as a black woman who ran for president in 1972. And thinking about this potentially historic moment right now, I think it's really a good time for people to look at the road before and to think about that historically, this race for the White House for women and obviously for African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit of a Western Mass tie, too, because later in life she taught at Mount Holyoke.
Yeah, and sort of doing research, I also discovered that Western Mass, Mount Holyoke Smith invited her here on several occasions to do commencement addresses, to speak to their student body and inspire them, as she had been doing before she ran for president. And then, of course, after 72, she's one of the most sought-out speakers.
So tell us a little bit about the history of Shirley Chisholm herself, the woman, and what led to her run for president.
Yeah, so Shirley Chisholm, ultimately ends up growing up in Brooklyn and grew up in a household where her parents, particularly her father, really inspired her to get into politics. So she was born in 1924, everybody. So that's where we get the November 1924. So we're at almost the 100-year mark. She was born in November 30th. But what's significant and important is her early sort of recognition through a teacher, actually, about her potential to be into politics. And so she really was inspired by her teachers, her professors at Brooklyn College, and then she, became involved as an educator in the 50s before she made her first historic run for state assembly in 1964. Right, so if everyone imagines the March on Washington in August 1963, and here you have this black woman who is trying to enter actually electoral politics in New York State and then winning in 64. And this, of course, will make her famous statewide. But by 68, her ambitions were higher, and she became the first black woman elected to U.S. Congress as a congresswoman from Brooklyn, New York. And this, of course, as I mentioned before, she'll end up running for president in 1972, which made her even a sort of global icon in many ways.
Was Shirley Chisholm the first major party female candidate? Was she the first female and black woman, or just the first black woman?
She was the first black woman who ultimately, was able to put together a bid. She was a Democrat, so within the Democratic Party, to actually run for president. It's always tough because even just now, I often ask my students, name political parties outside the Republicans and Democrats, and most people aren't aware of them as historians. So we're always cautious not to say first anything unless we are 3,000% sure that they are the first.
And I like to try to say major party for that very reason, too.
Exactly.
For better or for worse, we have a duopoly in this country.
There you go.
We're speaking with Dr. Ousmane Power Greene, the power of history, Clark University professor of history.
We used to have plenty of parties.
Yeah, I miss the wigs, mostly because I'm bald and I could it's spelled differently.
There you go.
That's hilarious. I was watching her declaration of intent to run for president, and what happens to her in those 4 years between 1968 and 1972 that really makes her want to run?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, first, part of what she soon became when she enters Congress by 68 is an advocate for, poor people, an advocate for issues around civil rights, working within the system. And quickly she realizes that it's not just a symbolic run, that the ideas she has are equal to the men in Congress, dominant men in Congress, and that people ought to have a choice of somebody who actually advocates for them. Hence her sort of being known to be unbought, unbossed. She really saw herself as a representation of working within the system, a lot of the social movement stuff that was happening outside the system. And so, that ultimately becomes sort of the impetus for her to decide to go for it, not as a token, but to actually say, look, why shouldn't I run for president? People respect my ideas. I have ways I believe can make the country better. And so that sort of led her to actually run.
And she gains a lot more support than you would have expected running up against a much larger political machine that they are a small cog of.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, part of the appeal, she's, asked to speak at all these places, universities all over. A lot of what her appeal is that understanding that a person who comes from humble beginnings in that era can certainly be an inspiration for everyone to realize that this country is made for people who believe in themselves and believe in the sort of dream and believe in the ideals. And I do think that this has absolutely set a precedent going forward with women, particularly black women, running for office.
Well, let's talk about the logical parallel here between Shirley Chisholm, who ran for president in 1972, and the current Democratic nominee for president, Vice President Kamala Harris. Yep. What parallels do you see between the candidacy, the campaign, the legacy of Shirley Chisholm, and what Kamala Harris has brought to the table?
I think that part of what makes it in some ways fascinating is that the conversation and the discourse over having a woman president hasn't changed that much. So one of the parallels is the types of ways in which people have gone after, not her ideas, of Vice President Harris, but actually her, right? Her biology, her person, right? That's one direct parallel. I mean, one would have hoped perhaps that, 50 years later plus that it would not be the same thing. But unfortunately, that's one of the sort of legacies that we still haven't seen advance. On the other hand, there is a sense, at least, that it's not as improbable as it was then. And so on the flip side, I do think that Vice President Harris's advocacy, for working people, advocacy for disenfranchised people, certainly, can tie directly to. I haven't gone through issue by issue, but I would say that by and large, the passion that Vice President Harris has for what we think about as ordinary people and trying to promote their well-being is very much what Shirley Chisholm successfully ran on and gained so much support, even if, she didn't, obviously get as far as Vice President Harris in terms of for the presidency.
Later in the show, we'll continue to ignore whatever is going on with exit polls today and turn our attention to the justice being brought to households via the means of the Internet Court of Judge John Hodgman, who will bring his decisioning live to the Shea Theater this Friday.
But up next, more of the Power of History with Dr. Ousmane Power Greene, reflecting on what would be the 100th birthday of the first black female presidential candidate from a major party, Shirley Chisholm. We'll hear how different factions in the black community accepted her campaign in the 1970s.
And we'll ask a little bit about his Clark University hip-hop class.
Because we are jealous we cannot take the history of hip-hop class.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
And you are too.
We're talking with Dr. Ousmane Power Greene, the power of history. We're talking about Shirley Chisholm. This election season, it would have been Shirley Chisholm's 100th birthday in November, and Shirley Chisholm running on the Democratic ticket for President of the United States over 50 years ago. And now there is a black woman at the top of the ticket for the Democratic Party right now. And we'll see shortly how that all fares. What was the thought of parts of the black community in 1972 with Shirley Chisholm running for president? Was she largely supported by the black community for this? It's been sad, interesting to look at how different factions of society look at Kamala Harris's candidacy. You've got Donald Trump saying she decided to turn black at a certain period of time. You've got President Barack Obama coming forward and imploring black men to say, hey, you need to support this black woman. I mean, there's no monolithic black community, but what were some of the ideas surrounding Shirley Chisholm's run in 72 from parts of the black community?
Yeah, well, so one way to think about it, thinking about history and memory, has to do with the reality that in 1972, and even before that, in 68, when Shirley Chisholm is working within the system, because of the successes of the civil rights movement, many figures such as Angela Davis, who were sort of working outside the system, actually got more recognition, right? And so, in that moment, to really believe that she could make legitimate change around many of the issues that were core to the civil rights movement during that time was something that is important to thinking about her legacy. Now, in terms of the black community, by 72, those who study the civil rights movement and Black Power era, the splinters were everywhere. And that's part of why within sort of, black history and particularly in this moment, there's a feeling of lack of coherence in the 70s, unlike maybe the 60s and late 50s around racial justice and equal rights, because the issues that go beyond having the state acknowledge you, ending Jim Crow, providing for voting rights, the issues, once you get past that, the solutions to those issues are myriad, right? And so there are people that very much saw her using language like a distraction, using language like undermining black men who were in office, it being a stunt. And so the black community certainly was not unified around her idea of running for president, even though she had very fervent people who supported her. How has that changed? I don't know if it has. I mean, I think that, when Barack Obama, if people remember, ran for president, there was very similar fractions within very prominent black people over Barack Obama's run. And fast forward in time to now, it's not that surprising that there would be a diverse group of opinions about whether Vice President Harris will actually meet some of the needs that black political leaders, social leaders have been clamoring for from the federal government for a long time. In some ways, I feel like what it means for the nation and what it means for the black community strangely seems to be subsided by the sort of frustrations that the federal government can't do more.
A lot of the conversation in both the issues with Obama and with Harris stem from a growing distrust of the general political system and the people that end up working with it, as opposed to the people within it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even though that is the issue in that community, when blown up by people outside of that community, they like to shrink it down to, it's this one thing, when it ends up having so many facets to it.
Absolutely.
That said, one of the things that in a later interview Chisholm says about her campaign that killed some of her momentum was support by her fellow Democrats who were also running for president. She had some support from some of the other candidates, and when the people that were supporting her found out about it, they're like, oh, so you are just part of the machine. And she's eloquent in talking about it, but I feel like that ties into what you're saying here.
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of politics, mainstream politics, running for elected office, is oftentimes thinking about how a particular opponent can be undermined by people casting their votes for another person who they don't think will win, right? So, and that's exactly what happened, right? And I've heard that in conversations now, with people who are not as supportive of Vice President Harris making claims that they're going to vote for more independent parties as a statement about their frustration with the federal government, U.S. foreign policy, et cetera. And so that very much resonates with similar frustrations during the Vietnam War, the idea of black power and black empowerment and what exactly black politics would look like in the 70s. These are all reasons why people also were leaning away from her and accusing her of undermining other candidates and using her run for office as something that would actually be a detriment to the Democratic Party and their nominee.
We're talking about the history of Shirley Chisholm in this historic election season and the parallels between what's going on from 1972 in that campaign and this campaign here in 2024.
So Chisholm clearly, she loses the bid and stays in Congress for another decade.
Yeah.
But when we talk about her later career, because it seems to me like there's incredible power and statement there too. She stays in Congress. She does the work. She never really wavers on the platforms that she's had at the beginning. And then many others could go and be invited places and teach and talk and be outright bitter about the situation, but she never really is.
And I think it goes back to her sort of her passion for educating people. It makes sense that a person who wins office, right, and is office, is one of the best people to actually educate people about the political process. Many African Americans, many women, we're thinking about the 70s, really didn't see politics as something that they were involved in and they could get involved in. So the generation of women coming of age in the 70s who have a chance to have Shirley Chisholm come speak to their school and to help them talk about the details from the inside of politics, that inspiration far outreaches sometimes what you can qualify, right? Like, how do you define your impact, when you go give a speech or you go organizing? But it does seem clear that her second career as a professor at Mount Holyoke and as a person who is involved with organizing the National Political Congress of Black Women, she's in this role as a person who is an advocate, but also an educator, a political educator, and a person who has insights into ways of actually finding solutions besides just activism. And I think that's part of the reason why she was such a natural to find herself in higher education.
Dr. Ousmane Power Greene, the power of history. You are yourself an excellent educator about all things historical. And now I am curious, where are you in your history of hip hop? Like, what is the class studying like today?
Yeah, well, so we are. What are we studying today? So we just finished talking about Public Enemy and Ice Cube. If people remember the early 90s when rap music was being blamed for crime, we were really having a conversation about the culture wars because my students, being born in the early 2000s, in many ways they're enduring very similar. They could really resonate with this debate over music and the impact that music can have potentially on populations and publics. And so yeah, last class was about censorship and thinking about, the lines that were drawn as, Dolores Tucker and others really came after, within the Black community even, rap artists.
Tipper
Gore, yeah, absolutely. Bill Clinton after going
Mm-hmm.
after Sister Soldier. So yeah, this is where we're at in the class. And part of the reason why I was so excited to teach what we think about as a cultural history class, not just for my personal,
and also not just to say to a room full of people who have only ever seen Ice-T on SVU and didn't know that he was touted out on daytime television to answer for Cop Killer for years.
Exactly.
Well, the ironies are incredible. Particularly thinking about Ice Cube's career. Are we there yet? Or his films, from Friday. But more interestingly, in terms of what historians are interested in, I mean, we are really interested in thinking about the impact that music and art have on conversations, reflect conversation in society, but also stimulate conversations. And so my course on history of hip hop has really given me an opportunity to talk about what we call contemporary. 40 years ago, everybody, is actually contemporary history, really recent for historians.
No.
Actually, historians really are just getting to like the late 70s and 80s because they need some distance and they need to be able to get access to archives that are in people's basements.
You should feel good about that, Khalid, because it's not yet really real history. We've lived it. We need to let it go a lot longer. 40 years.
We need to turn over our letters to the archives so scholars could actually get access to them.
Yeah.
Where some of the entertainers like Ice-T and Ice Cube are actually still seeing themselves very active, and so getting their diaries and letters and what they actually thought in 1991 is very difficult.
Yeah.
So
good. We're not history yet.
It's still an incredible thing to have lived through the arc, though.
Oh, totally. Yeah, to going from, them saying that the rap music is causing crime to having a Nobel laureate rapper headlining the Super Bowl halftime show.
Absolutely.
I think part of history
It's
to
a
have
Pulitzer.
watched.
He won a
Yeah, I thought that
It's a Pulitzer.
Kendrick won the Nobel Prize.
Pulitzer. Pulitzer is still that is still real high praise.
Oh yeah.
I thought he won. I thought for sure he won one.
No.
Not yet. He's still young.
There's time.
There's plenty of time.
There's plenty of other rappers who are gonna misstep and inspire him to create 8 songs in 4 days.
I know, right?
Oh my goodness, that whole don't come for Pulitzer Prize winners.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Actually, because you brought that up, I do think it is very ironic and interesting that legitimacy around rap music when one thinks about the history of the blues and jazz and how those were not seen as legitimate art forms to take seriously by scholars in universities. And obviously that changed. And it's the same thing with rap music, right? Where back in the late 90s, Harvard created their hip-hop archive and their hip-hop studies division, and that was seen by many as being a starting point for the academy taking seriously this particular art form that, as my students learned in the 70s, early 80s, many people, even into the 90s, questioned it as music at all in terms of rap, graffiti as art at all, right? Breakdancing as legitimate dancing at all. So, yes, we have come a very far way.
And after Australia and the Olympics, we're still questioning.
We're still questioning.
A few strange steps backwards.
Exactly.
All about expression.
Yeah. It's always a delight to talk to you, Dr. Ousmane.
Thank you for having me
This
on.
is a great segment, The Power of History, and thanks for helping us navigate through the history we are all navigating through together right now.
Yes. Go check out Shola Lynch's film about Shirley Chisholm, 72, Unbought, Unbossed, everybody. It's a great documentary. And I think you all should check out. It's worth it.
And then you can dream about how much easier it would be to vote for a woman president if we'd already had one.
There you go.
That's true. You wouldn't have to imagine it.
No. And also check out the biopic with Regina King, which is pretty good.
Nice.
Up next, the Election Day distractions continue with John Hodgman and Jesse Thorn from the Judge John Hodgman podcast, who are bringing their road court to the stage of the Shea Theater this Friday.
We'll lean into the banality of common household disputes since you already voted.
You already voted, right? Like, if not, go do that.
You still have time. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by UMass Amherst School of Public Policy, offering graduate programs in public affairs, public policy and administration, data analytics, and computational social science. umass.edu/SPP. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
Where are you, Jesse Thorn? Are you in California?
I'm in Los Angeles, sunny Hollywood.
Home of the world champion Dodgers.
I'm a Giants fan.
All
I
right,
hate the
cool.
Dodgers. My dog also hates the Dodgers on account of the nightmarish barrage of fireworks that has been the last...
Oh, I bet.
Everyone who's not at NEPM right now has much better lighting.
I know, right?
And that tracks for public radio,
We have
I
the
guess.
beautiful fluorescent lights of the Fabulous 413
What's
studio.
beautiful about that?
It's gorgeous.
It's a mild migraine trigger.
I'm actually going to
Well,
fix that because it
in
bothers
any
me.
light, it's nice to see your faces.
Nice to see you. I'm so
Thank
excited
you.
about Friday.
I know. I wonder what will happen between now and then.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
In an effort to avoid the election day today, we turn our attention instead to a different type of justice, the Webby Award-winning Judge John Hodgman podcast, starring famous minor television personality John Hodgman and his bailiff, public radio superstar and podcast entrepreneur Jesse Thorn. They're bringing their mix of pop culture obsession and unadulterated fake legal wisdom to the stage of the Shea Theater in Turners Falls this Friday, November 8th, with their Road Court.
Former 413 vacationer John Hodgman wrote large swaths of a book of fake trivia while at the Lady Killigrew Cafe at the Montague Book Mill. He was asked to appear on Comedy Central's The Daily Show with Jon Stewart to talk about his book, after which Jon Stewart asked Hodgman to become a regular contributor to The Daily Show as both a resident expert and as a deranged billionaire.
Until that character got too real. Stop thinking about the election. Stop thinking about the election.
You did this to us.
You may also know Hodgman as an advertising icon, having appeared as the personification of a PC in the Mac versus PC Apple computer ads. Hodgman continues to appear in television and film, and to delight the masses weekly in his role as Judge John Hodgman, with both his podcast and column in the New York Times Magazine, where he adjudicates minor household disputes.
Bailiff Jesse Thorn is the founder of the Maximum Fun Podcast Network and the host and producer of the podcasts Judge John Hodgman and Jordan Jesse Go, and his radio show and podcast Bullseye, formerly The Sound of Young America, is distributed by NPR to hundreds of public terrestrial radio stations. Hodgman and Jesse Thorn come to the Shea this Friday.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much. We're so glad to be here to give you something else to think about today.
Yeah, I think everybody needs that kind of a break. especially if you're listening to NPR all the time, it can weigh down on your soul. So what better way than problems that happen in your household between people that you love dearly, but may become pet peeves if not settled by an internet judge?
I have found that when I explain Judge John Hodgman to non-listeners, I usually say, I'll start by saying like, oh, it's like Judge Judy or Judge Mathis, but it's a comedy show, but it's real people. And then I'm like, but they like each other. The people like each other.
Yeah, it's really more of a low-key interview show where Jesse and I talk to interesting strangers from around the country and even the globe. And we talk about really important stuff like, and this is something that's come up recently, and I'm going to put it to you to talk about as well for you folks to discuss. Is an eclair a donut? What do you think?
Oh, my.
Oh, okay.
Is an eclair a donut?
This harkens to the legendary Judge John Hodgman case of all time. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
It's not. It's technically a taco.
Khalees, I have to respectfully disagree with you there.
If we're going by cube theory, it's a taco.
I don't go by internet theories on anything anymore.
So isn't
I
it
have
like
seen the
that's safe.
chart that seeks to
That's
prove
safe.
that a taco is a hot dog is a sandwich or a kind of sandwich using the so-called cube theory. But I believe that a taco, like a hot dog, is its own thing, and that's okay. Not everything has to be a sandwich. It can
Fair.
be its own thing with its own cultural derivation. But please don't try to deflect. The topic at hand is an eclair, a donut. While you're thinking it over, isn't it so nice to think about eclairs and donuts or anything else?
Yes.
It's okay to take a break and put your mind to something else because your mind is not going to affect the outcome of what happens today or any day.
That's true.
Maybe your work and your volunteering would have had an element to it. You've added to a great effort, and congratulations for you on doing so. But right now, just think about donuts.
Jesse Thorn is an eclair a donut. Jesse Thorn.
Here's the standard that John instituted many, many years ago for is a hot dog a sandwich? And I
Settled
think it's
law.
one that is useful to apply here. It is, if you sent somebody to go get you a sandwich and they brought back a hot dog, how would you feel? And so I think the question for you guys and for the audience is to ask yourself, if I said, could you go get a dozen donuts and someone came back with a dozen eclairs, how would you feel?
I mean, that's an upgrade. I would be elated.
Yeah.
They did not, because they brought me eclairs and not donuts. I was thinking about this. Is it dough? Are we thinking about it as like filled things like risen dough, yeast donuts in that form? Because the origin of donuts lies that way. But like you can also have cake batter donuts, which would lead you back to the pate that you use to make the puff pastry that makes eclairs. So it kind of works in that end. And I think the crux of it is, where do French crullers then fit? Because if French crullers are truly donuts, then yes, eclairs are donuts. But if French crullers are their own thing because it uses the same batter base as eclairs, then I think that they aren't.
Khalees, you're a baker, aren't you?
I did food for a very long time.
Yeah. I want there to be a Cooking with Khalees public radio / television show based out of NEPM.
Yeah, because you've really circled, as you put it, and as we talk about it on the show, the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is the batter, and the batter is choux, C-H-O-U-X.
Pâté choux.
Which is pâté choux, which is a particular kind of pastry batter that is used in eclairs and in French crullers, but not typically in the humble truck stop donut.
But in answer to Jesse Thorn's, I guess, response
I
to
said
this,
donut, no butts.
if you said, I'm going to send you out for a dozen donuts, and you came back with 8 traditional donuts and 4 eclairs, I don't think anybody would be upset. It would
I think-
fit- it would
I think-
fit into
Because
the mix.
eclairs are better than donuts. This
yeah.
isn't
Thank
a
you.
question
Like,
of whether eclairs are better than donuts. Yes, they are a little bit better than donuts, so no one would be upset. But if we follow that crazy balls logic to its conclusion, then Chevys are Bentleys, because if I sent you out to buy me a Chevy and you came back with a Bentley, I'd be thrilled.
That's true.
The donut is the Chevy of the pastry world.
It's reliable.
Well, I was going to say it transports you from one place to another, for sure.
To Monty's example, I think there's a lot of disappointment if you bring back 8 donuts and 4 eclairs, because 4 people are getting eclairs and a bunch of people are not, and they're going to be sad that they missed the eclairs.
Can you get eclairs in a donut shop?
Not a donut shop. You can get them in one of these fancy Sex and the City donut shops.
Can you get eclairs at
Not a
Dunkin'
real one.
Donuts?
You
I was
can,
going to
but
say,
they're-
we're talking
but they're
to
gross.
New England right
And-
now.
Yeah.
You can, but they're not.
But you can.
I don't care if I offend the Dunkin's people, frankly.
go ahead.
Here we go.
But Dunkin's definitely offers eclairs, but if they feel like eclairs in name only because they are definitely using the yeast-raised dough that they use for the other donuts, and that's not what
You're
an eclair is
suggesting
made of.
Dunkin' Donuts doesn't use a true shoe.
Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts eclairs are donuts.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Cleese, but can you tell me what a shoe batter is made of? A pate shoe?
So what you do is you boil water or milk and butter.
Okay,
and,
I'm on it. I already have that boiling.
And then you get flour and you add that to the water mixture. Once you have that in like a sort of pasty ball, you cool it down a little bit and start adding eggs to it. And that's what makes the batter.
It's
Cooking
rich
with
and
Khalees.
Elevated, and it's not yeasty and risen.
No, it's risen through protein connections in the eggs. Basically,
Well, I'm a
expansion
big fan of a pasty ball.
Are we allowed to say that on public radio,
You
Jesse
did spend
Thorn?
a lot of time in Western Massachusetts, so that makes sense.
I'm pretty pasty, and I'm having a ball.
That's true.
I once had an extended conversation, Monty, regarding my NPR show with NPR Standards and Practices because I interviewed the actor J.B. Smoove, and we had to have an extended clarification on whether I could say the name of the film Pootie Tang. The answer to which was that I could, but only to identify the film, and I couldn't sound like I was enjoying saying it.
Which we have now done here on the Fabulous 413 as well. And the 413 is where Jesse Thorn, public radio superstar and podcasting entrepreneur, will be accompanying the good Judge John Hodgman for Road Court, which I don't even know if there are any tickets left for the Shea Show.
There may be some standby tickets for the pasty ball, known as the Judge John Hodgman Show on Friday.
Excellent.
And the podcast is available to all.
This Shea Show will be a podcast eventually because I was looking at the podcast feed and none of the other ones that you've done so far, which look like they've been fun when I've been seeing clips on social media and Jesse Thorn patting a capybara or whatever. I've not seen them pop up on the podcast yet.
In the normal world of podcasting, you would go to MaximumFun.org every Wednesday and download your Judge John Hodgman episode. And it's very much like an afternoon court show. But instead of Judge Judy, it's me. Jesse Thorn is my bailiff. And we have real life people who join us via technology to fight over dumb little things like how to load the dishwasher. Or we just heard a case about a couple who bought a summer camp on a lake in Ontario. And the only toilets at the summer camp are in a cabin, and they're all lined up next to each other without any division whatsoever.
Oh, my.
And the spouse of the owner of the camp is like, may I please have a private toilet in our owner's cabin? And he's like, I'm not sure that that's so much fun.
I just heard the one where you were talking about the numbers of magazines, trade magazines for a veterinarian that were stacking up and how her husband wanted to get rid of them out of the bathroom.
Yeah, she's a veterinarian and she has a subscription to the Journal of American Veterinarian Association, whatever. And it comes out twice a week. Got a pile that's as tall as her toilet tank. And he's like, she's got to either read these or get rid of them. And I'm like, absolutely.
I
You
can't.
got to keep up to date on all the vet news.
I will tell you, Hodgman, I had a laugh out loud, I think, one of the funniest Judge John Hodgman moments ever in that when you referred to TLDR as toilet-length deep reading. I want that to be the new internet standard for
Thank you for bringing
TLDR.
that up, because I mean, you know, the whole conversation is improvised and free-flowing, and I usually don't remember anything I said. So thank you.
Remember that one. Work it into your next stand-up because it was so good.
When we do these live shows, we go from town to town and we find people in those towns to join us on stage. And indeed, we have a very special guest, one of our regular listeners who happens to be a professional wrestler.
Oh, yes.
Professional amateur wrestler.
Right. Gets paid, professional.
He gets paid now. Yeah, that's right. He's out. Anyway, the wonderful Perry Von Vicious, Western Mass wrestling legend, is going to be presenting a case against a fellow wrestler.
Oh.
And I don't know. Last time I was at the Shea, Perry picked me up and threw me over his shoulders and spun me around. So I don't know what kind of antics we'll get up to on stage, but we do record them and we do eventually release them on the podcast feed as well.
I can't help it.
Coming up, more with Judge John Hodgman and Bailiff Jesse Thorn, where Hodgman will quiz us on important issues this election day.
Like, what is the official muffin of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, offering solar options, energy security, and solutions for the local community. Learn more at northeast-solar.com. NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is your election day respite from all the wall-to-wall NPR coverage about whatever is going on in swing states right now as we speak with the Honorable Judge John Hodgman and Bailiff Jesse Thorn, who will be at the Shea Theater in Turners Falls on Friday.
Look, everyone did the work that they needed to do, and they should feel good about it.
Hopefully.
And
You still have time.
The truth is, your worry and your anxiety are thoughts that exist inside your dome and are not going to affect the outcome one way or another. So it is okay for you to distract yourself. In fact, it's even healthier for you to get out, take a walk, stop listening to stuff, and consider questions like this. If you had to give up donuts for the rest of your life or ice cream, which would you choose?
Donuts.
Donuts.
That's an easy one.
That was
Yeah.
obvious.
That was a
That was
breeze.
stupid,
Yeah.
right?
That's not stupid.
It's
What's
not
important
stupid.
is that the audience has already done what they needed to do in the election, which is
Give up donuts.
vote
Yes.
or not vote, because the audience lives in Massachusetts, John lives in New York, and I live in California. So because
Doesn't
of
really
the
matter.
Electoral College, our votes don't count.
No, well,
That's not true.
it's and in Massachusetts we have 5 questions on the ballot, which is a lot for us that will all affect state things. And as I constantly say, the smaller the election or the smaller the issues, the more it directly affects you. So if you're
Is
not,
a hot dog a sandwich? One of the questions on
Yes,
the ballot.
it's question
it should
4.
be. It's up there with the mushrooms and hot dogs for question
Speaking
4.
of real legislation, can any of you name the official muffin of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
We have a muffin.
Yes, and Monty Belmonte can, because Monty has just listened to 2.5 of the episodes of the new Maximum Fun podcast, E Pluribus Motto, starring none other than John Hodgman and Janet Varney. And I know that the official muffin of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is the corn muffin.
That's correct. Thank you for the plug, although I don't like the way Monty Belmonte is referring to himself in the third person now.
Does John Hodgman like the way Monty Belmonte is referring to himself?
Oh no, nobody likes this.
No. I love this podcast.
but can I say this?
Yes.
I love Monty Belmonte.
I love you. I should also say I'm a guest bailiff often on the Judge John Hodgman podcast. Summertime Fun Time guest
Well,
bailiff. Monty
thanks for
Belmonte.
giving away the answer to my little quiz. Do you know what the runner-up was?
Was it something to do with cranberries? I feel like it should have.
Cranberry muffin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a dispute I have with you that I would like to look further into, but haven't had the time yet, Hodgman. In that podcast, you say that the Massachusetts General Court, which is the legislature, put
Genco, I call
put
it.
the end to children
Mudgenco.
lobbying the legislature for things of this nature. But in the 90s, after this muffin, my sister in Norton, Massachusetts, was in a 7th grade class that lobbied to have Boston cream pie become the official pie of the Commonwealth. So
Which doesn't make any sense because it's not
And
pie.
I believe that the Boston cream donut is the official donut.
what about the Boston cream eclair?
No,
That
I mean
is
it would
not
be
something that exists.
it would be an upgrade.
But you're right, though. My friend in high school, Ben Lorch, his sister, was part of a 7th grade class that lobbied for the corn muffin. They faced, obviously, in Massachusetts, it's a bunch of contrarian jerks. So when someone heard that someone wanted a corn muffin to be the state muffin, they learned, someone wants something. We have to go be against it.
Yeah.
And that's when the cranberry lobby got together and started lobbying for the cranberry muffin.
Yeah.
It got very protracted and very heated and ended with some dramatic readings in the state legislature before the corn muffin finally triumphed. And then the next piece of legislation after that was a piece outlawing children from suggesting state things. But it must not have passed if you're saying that your sister.
I know my sister was
for the
part of a
Boston
class,
pie.
but maybe they found like a caveat in the law where they like use a legislator to do their bidding.
Tell Jesse Thorn what a Boston cream pie is.
What's a Boston cream pie?
Okay.
About 4 pounds.
It's 3.14. But it's basically yellow cake with custard as a filling, and then you cover the whole thing in chocolate. That's a Boston cream pie.
That's a Boston cream pie.
It's
When
not.
It's not a pie, but it does sound very good.
I mean,
pretty good.
It can be good.
Yeah.
It's usually now we won't get into that. It can be good.
Why not? We need to think of anything else.
People need the distraction today. They want to think about the Boston cream pie that my sister, Colleen
I mean,
Belmonte,
it's
helped
just
to make
going
a state
to double
dessert.
down on how much of a snob I am about food. It can be very, very good. When it's made with more pastry cream than like pudding, it's pretty good.
As a native Californian, the defining experience of childhood in California is believing that if you pick a California golden poppy, which is the official flower of the state of California, you will go to jail. And that's adult jail, too. That's not juvenile detention. You're going to go straight to adult jail if you pick one of those golden puppies.
Wow.
Well, if any of your listeners have friends or family that live in California, we will be coming live to San Francisco and Los Angeles in early February, and I will keep my hands off your poppies, California.
Yeah, and don't kill the California golden eagle like Johnny Cash accidentally did. That's also a very punishable offense.
And hey, can I mention something? We are doing the show at the Shea Theater on Friday.
Yes.
But if you can't get in and you want some more distraction, drive up to Burlington, Vermont tomorrow. We're doing a show at the Higher Ground Ballroom tomorrow on the day after Election Day.
That could be fun.
And that's going to be interesting.
Yes, for sure.
You would have thought that we looked at a calendar before we booked these dates.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, one of the things, whether you are celebrating or not celebrating, being with other people is really nice.
Yes.
It's true.
And I think we're going to have a really nice time. And I don't think we're going to know anything, by the way, by that time anyway, so.
But we are trying to continue to avoid Election Day with Judge John Hodgman and Bailiff Jesse Thorn, who are coming to the Shea on Friday. And not to tie it too much into politics, but there is a question on the Massachusetts ballot about whether Uber and Lyft drivers should be allowed to unionize. So worker rights are on the ballot in the Commonwealth. And Jesse Thorn, as I had mentioned, you're a podcast entrepreneur, but your company, Maximum Fun, has done something over the last year that I think is incredible and innovative. Can you talk about the worker-owned status of your podcasting network?
For years and years, Maximum Fun, which is a network of now dozens of shows, was owned outright by me, the founder, or at least me and my wife, thanks to the laws of the state of California. But I was a sort of benevolent dictator of this for-profit endeavor. And I was born to be an artist, perhaps, and not a businessman. Although, we were in many ways a pioneering and important company. And the company is very successful in a time when lots of more capitalistically oriented podcasting companies have gone out of business over the last couple of years. But some upheaval in my life led me to think that it was time for me to get out of the businessman business so that I could focus on the family man business and the artist business. I actually helped my employees buy the company from me. I am one of the employees that bought the company from me. And we're now a 100% fully worker-owned cooperative. So things that benefit the company benefit all of us who work there. I'm very proud of that. Like forever, the shows on Maximum Fun, of which Judge John Hodgman is one, have been owned by their creators. That was a really important value for me as a creator when we started the company. But, the business operations were owned by me, businessman Jesse Thorn, local businessman, as I'm known to all. And I really like the idea of these wonderful people who are now in the dozens who compose Maximum Fun becoming owners alongside me. And, I was actually inspired by my father-in-law, who worked for something like 35, 40 years at a worker-owned hardware store and just retired this past year. And if you've worked in retail or you know folks who work in retail, it's not normally a very financially rewarding job. It's one where there's a lot of exploitation. And I saw that him working at this worker-owned hardware store, Jackson's Hardware in Marin County in California, meant that he could raise a family and retire at a reasonable age. And I even once got to go on a Jackson's family trip to Hawaii.
Whoa.
Where all the employees and their families partners got to go to Hawaii on Jackson's dime. And so I knew that there was a different, better way. So I'm really excited about it. We're about a year into the co-op thing, and it's going really great.
When are we going to Hawaii?
Exactly my question.
Sorry, Monty.
No, go
well,
ahead.
Monty, you're invited too because you're our fun time, summertime bailiff.
Yeah, and
you jump on.
what's more summertime fun than Hawaii?
You guys can stop talking about going to Hawaii now.
No, Khalees, you're in too, as far as I'm concerned.
Look, we don't need to go to Hawaii. We're going to Western Massachusetts, the Hawaii of the Northeast.
The neighborhood that I live in Turner's Falls is an island, and one of the older neighbors when we moved there said, "You live on an island now. You don't need to go to Hawaii." It was like the first thing she said to us when we moved there.
Yeah,
and
you're
it
on
turned out to
island
be
time
true.
now.
Yeah, I'm on island time all the time.
I got one for the crowd.
Okay.
Okay.
We got the holidays coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And everyone's going to get together and have dinner with each other and not talk about politics.
Right.
Which would you give up for the rest of your life? Mashed potatoes or macaroni and cheese?
This one is profoundly easy for me, John, because I don't even particularly like mashed potatoes.
Wow.
And I love macaroni and cheese.
And-
So it's a very easy call for me. I ate macaroni and cheese for breakfast this morning.
That sounds delicious.
Nothing says your civic obligation and duty of Election Day like macaroni and cheese.
And this is the point where I mentioned, like, I am a black woman. I can't give up mac and cheese. I will not be allowed at the cookouts anymore. So goodbye mashed potatoes.
And as a half Irish person, I would be betraying that half side of me by giving away mashed potatoes. So I would have to give up macaroni and cheese.
Also, you and I kind of look like mashed potatoes, Monty.
That's true.
So,
Yes.
yeah, another pasty ball is...
I love pasty balls
Is
and
this
mashed
taking
potatoes.
you are what you eat to a certain extreme that we should maybe not explore?
I don't work on camera very much anymore, but I do moisturize with mashed potatoes before I ever do an acting job.
So good.
Sorry, Monty, the correct answer is macaroni and cheese is better than mashed potatoes.
Okay.
What about macaroni and cheese or French fries? See, that's where I get confused.
Again, macaroni and cheese for me.
If you have
Yeah, it's
macaroni and cheese done well enough, you can turn the macaroni and cheese basically into French fries.
Here we go.
So you're sticking with macaroni and cheese?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what I would have to do as well, I'm afraid.
Delicious. Are you talking about waiting until it is cooled, then slicing it into pieces, breading it, and frying it?
Yes, I am.
That sounds great.
That does sound
It is.
great.
Sounds a lot better
It
than
is-
French fries.
That
I'll
sounds
tell you
better
that
than
right
both
now.
of
It is
macaroni
pretty
and cheese
great.
and French fries.
Have you
together.
really done that deep fried macaroni and cheese fingers?
Yes. And also, there's a place around here that used to make burger patties out of deep fried macaroni and cheese.
Wow.
It was a heart attack waiting to happen, but it was delicious on the way to the ER.
I remember very vividly the first time that I ever had those fried macaroni and cheese stick French fries. I was going to dinner, this is 20 years ago, with John, you and my mutual friend Patton Oswalt, comedian Patton Oswalt, at a restaurant in San Francisco. And I will never forget the look on his eyes as we stood outside about to go in to sit down and have this nice dinner, as he said, they cut up macaroni and cheese, and then they put breadcrumbs on it and cook it for you as a French fry.
A thing that I started to learn in my adulthood is the amount of things that you can turn into French fries. It's really wonderful and amazing and should be encouraged.
So then you don't have to give up French fries at all.
Well, I'm sure as much as we'd all love to just sit around and eat macaroni and cheese all day and comfort ourselves that way, there's probably some healthier ways to do it.
Yes.
Monty and Khalees, what are your number one non-food comfort rituals?
I watch Shaw Brothers Kung Fu movies.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, so I may be viewing a Shaw Brothers Kung Fu movie this evening.
It's board games and sports anime.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about sports anime. Tell me more.
Sports anime is such a comfort food where like watching is concerned because it always concerns like either some savant or some underdog who manages to like learn on a quick curve how to do the thing. And if you are into underdog stories that are done really well with a lot of humanistic nuance, like sports anime is where it's at.
Is there a particular series you can recommend or
Oh, a bunch. It depends on what sport you're into. There's a bunch on baseball.
is there any on extinct hockey like Hartford Whalers?
There's actually one I'm in the middle of watching that's about a girls' hockey team, which is really great, called Orange something. I watch too many series at the same time. But I'm going to recommend one that is about a sport that only exists in Japan, and it's called Backflip, which is about men's synchronized rhythmic gymnastics, which is a sport that only exists in Japan. It's a team sport. It's all like acrobatics that are choreographed, and it's wicked cool. And it sent me down a hours-long rabbit hole of watching actual teams do their routines. And there's a team that did the routine from the anime series that you can watch, so you can see real bodies doing all of the moves from the anime series.
That's great.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, and I took the advantage of the moment to do a little Googling. Are you referring to Pura Ore, Pride of Orange?
Yes, that's the one.
All right.
Thank you.
Jesse Thorn, what are you going to do? What's your comfort non-food?
I like to watch the Antiques Roadshow.
Yes.
Shameless public media plug.
Here we go.
I like to watch Antiques Roadshow, and indeed, I have subscribed to a streaming video add-on service called PBS Living, which I use to watch Antiques Roadshow, The French Cook with Julia Child,
Classic.
and the British Antiques Roadshow themed competition show, Antiques Road Trip.
I love that.
That's awesome.
I'll give a plug for another PBS, public television, public media property, which is the remake of All Creatures Great and Small, which is, that will almost put me into a cozy coma. It's almost too cozy.
So there you go. Those are some ideas of what you can do to ease this evening's agita.
It took me a long time to learn that my brain does not control the outcome of world events.
Yeah.
And my attention upon the news does not turn the course of the tide of history in any way. And it is rather comforting to remember that no one cares what I think. So I'm very glad that you have me here, but it is also comforting to appreciate we've done our work and we can do something else until we get the information.
I think people do care what you think, Judge John Hodgman, as your podcast is wildly successful under the podcast network Maximum Fun, which has now become a worker-owned co-op thanks to the entrepreneuristic generosity of its founder, Jesse Thorn, who plays Bailiff on the Judge John Hodgman podcast, and who you can see in real life in Western Massachusetts, where Judge John Hodgman used to vacation, this Friday at the Shea Theater in Turners Falls and beyond in places in New England. If you can't get tickets and you feel like making a drive to Burlington or
Portland,
Maine, which is a beautiful place to go to. Yeah, so
go take a little weekend trip to Portland, Maine at the State Theater. If you know anyone on the West Coast, let them know. MaximumFun.org/events is where you can get your tickets. And if you have disputes that you'd like us to hear on stage or on the Judge John Hodgman podcast, you can send in your beefs to MaximumFun.org/JJHO. That's MaximumFun.org/JJO.
thank you both. I'm so excited to see you in real life on Friday.
I can't wait to spend time with you on stage, and maybe we'll do some wrestling.
I love it. I also was thrown by Perry Von Vicious at the last time we were on stage at the Shea. So,
Jesse, have you ever been thrown by Perry Von Vicious on stage at the Shea Theater?
Somehow I've never been thrown by Perry Von Vicious on stage at the Shea Theater.
Oh, you
okay.
simply must.
Your time is coming.
Yeah.
Thank you to both of you, and I don't need to explain this to you, but aloha means goodbye.
Can't wait to go to Hawaii.
I mean, you're going to Portland, which I would argue is more the Hawaii of New England, but that's just me.
It's the patch in Turners Falls.
It's not.
Well, your friends, they came from...
Go vote if you haven't already, y'all.
See you for whatever tomorrow brings here on the Fabulous 413.
Cross your fingers.